The saddest of goodbyes, friends and family gather for Liam Payne's funeral. Among those paying their respects today, the singer's former One Direction bandmates. It was a private ceremony for someone publicly loved by so many.
It's just good that the boys are sticking together. It must be so hard for them, and obviously Cheryl and his son as well.
I couldn't stop crying.
Probably the saddest part, knowing that the reunion is obviously at a funeral.
It is a month since the 31-year-old died in Argentina, where 3 people have been charged in connection with his death. Also tonight. Reports Ukraine has fired British-made Storm Shadow missiles at targets inside Russia for the first time. It's after the US ramps up its support for President Zelensky. We ask, what could it mean for the war? Here, a 92-year-old man is charged with the murder of a woman in Bristol nearly 60 years ago. 800 UK jobs to go at Ford. The car giant is restructuring, blaming low demand for electric vehicles and Chinese competition. Plus, end of a sporting era. One of the greatest, Rafa Nadal, bids farewell to professional tennis.
This is the ITV Evening News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. The friends and family of Liam Payne, including stars from across the world of music, gathered today as they said goodbye at his funeral. All 4 of Liam's One Direction bandmates attended the service at a church in Buckinghamshire, as well as his former partner Cheryl, who has a son with Liam. The 31-year-old died last month after he fell from a hotel balcony in Argentina. And while his death sparked public mourning from fans around the world, today was a day for private reflection from those who knew him best. Rishi Davda reports.
First united by success, brought back together by sorrow. Harry, Niall, Louis and Zayn today mourn the loss of their bandmate.
What your heart is for.
Along with Liam Payne as One Direction, they shared a story of stardom beyond even their wildest dreams. From the stages of the X Factor to stadiums around the world. They later went their separate ways. Fans always held out hopes of a reunion, but not like this. Liam died last month at just 31 years old after falling from a hotel balcony in Argentina. A devastating shock for his family, friends and fans. His American girlfriend Kate Cassidy was at the church in Buckinghamshire this afternoon. She was with him in South America just days before his death. Former partner Cheryl had the impossible task of taking their 7-year-old to the service as they said their final goodbyes. While Simon Cowell, the man largely responsible for One Direction, embraced Liam's parents, Jeff and Karen. 4 tours to every corner of the globe earned One Direction a legion of loyal followers. Those who lined the streets shared their heartbreak.
That was probably the saddest part, knowing that the reunion is obviously at a funeral, because nobody wants that, and that it will never happen.
And it's just good that the boys are sticking together. It must be so hard for them, and obviously Cheryl and his son as well.
I couldn't stop crying. I mean, he's just an absolute legend. He's a legend.
She told me in the morning she don't feel the same about his little bones.
The public knew the big character, the talented performer, but today his closest remembered the man they knew, who loved to bowl, who lit up every room and adored his family. Rishi Davda, ITV News.
Ukraine has fired British-made Storm Shadow missiles at targets inside Russia for the first time. Downing Street has not commented on the development, but reports indicate that fragments of the missile have been found in Kursk, the Russian region where Ukrainian troops have been operating since August. It follows the US decision at the weekend to allow Ukraine to use their own missiles on Russia. And now President Biden has also agreed to send anti-personnel landmines to Ukraine as he tries to slow down Russian advances in the last weeks of his administration. Geraint Vincent reports.
Storm Shadow, an air-launched cruise missile which weighs over a ton and can pack quite a punch. It has been typically used to hit well-protected military targets, but never, until now, on Russian territory. When asked about the weapons used inside Russia today, Britain's Defence Secretary couldn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either.
Ukraine's action on the battlefield speaks for itself. We, as a nation and as a government, are doubling down on our support for Ukraine and determined to do more.
Storm Shadow missiles have already been used by Ukraine in this conflict on its own Russian-occupied territory. Had the Ukrainians been allowed to use them inside Russia earlier in the war, the experts say their impact could have been much greater than it will be now.
I think the Russians have got their act together. Their air defences are quite good now. They're good at concealing their logistics and other important sites. And they also have taken most of their aircraft out of range of that sort of missile when they're on the ground. So the fact they've moved quite a lot of their combat power east means there are less what I call critical targets.
On the front lines in eastern Ukraine, ground is not being won by long-range missile strikes, but by relentless Russian infantry assaults on Ukrainian positions. To help counter them, America is sending smart landmines, so-called because they can be deactivated in the future to protect the civilian population.
Because the Russians have been so unsuccessful in the way that they have been fighting, they've kind of changed their tactics a bit, and they don't lead with their mechanized forces anymore. They lead with dismounted forces. So that's what the Ukrainians are seeing right now. And they have a need for things that can help slow down that effort on the part of the Russians.
What if the U.S. government cuts military funding to Ukraine?
If they will cut, I think we will lose.
On American television, President Zelensky has been speaking bluntly. Ukraine has only ever received enough support to keep fighting, never to win. The coming change in American government may leave it completely dependent on what little Europe can still offer. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
And the growing fears of a wider war and escalation in the Ukraine conflict are just one topic covered in this week's Talking Politics. Tom, Anushka and Harry also have the latest on the farming fallout back here. You can watch that on ITVX or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Rising energy bills help push inflation to its highest level since April. The latest figures from the Office for National Statistics show that inflation hit 2.3% in October, slightly above the Bank of England's target of 2%. Well, the figures also showed electricity prices rose by 7.7%, with gas rising by almost 12%. Meanwhile, airfares went up by more than 6% and clothes by 1.5%. And while inflation is not back to the heights of recent years, it means mortgage holders might have to wait a little longer for interest rates to fall. Here's our economics editor, Joel Hills.
Energy bills have edged up again and the inflationary cycle isn't done yet. The Chancellor increased national insurance and the minimum wage in her budget, so from next April it will cost this hotel group an extra £500,000 a year to employ its 550 staff.
It will have a detrimental and devastating impact on our business.
Graham Bateman has to find £500,000 from somewhere.
If you wanted to offset that by raising the price of a hotel room, how much would it add to the
About 8%.
You'd have to put your prices up by 8%.
About 8%, we feel, to absorb it.
Is that what you plan to do?
We're looking at all options at the moment. But as I said earlier, there's only so much the consumer will accept.
The headline annual rate of inflation jumped to 2.3% last month, but 2 years ago, inflation stood above 11%. Price rises have since stabilised, and today inflation is within a whisker of the Bank of England's 2% target. The bank expects inflation to continue edging up in the months to come, peaking at 2.8% next year, before easing back to target in 2027. But the Chancellor's budget may push up prices by more than the bank thinks.
Well, the budget fixed the foundations in this country. It turned the page on economic instability that we saw under the previous government. And I think businesses, investors and working people across the country will be happy that we have a government that takes economic stability properly.
2024 is coming to an end. For much of this year, pay has risen faster than prices. But the government isn't suggesting that the cost of living crisis is over, because in parts of the economy, inflation is still very high. 1 in 5 people rent from a private landlord, and private rents are almost 9% higher than a year ago.
I noticed food prices in the supermarkets, they've levelled out.
Inflation has faded and Natalie Coleman can feel it. A pound doesn't buy what it did, but at least she no longer needs to use a credit card to get her and her teenage son through till payday.
I wouldn't say we're completely feeling better off, but we definitely feel that there's a little bit left at the end of the month. So that's a positive.
What happens next will depend on what businesses everywhere do with the extra costs the Chancellor served up in her budget. Will they, can they, take the hit, or will they seek to pass costs on? If the Bank of England is right, then the next wave of inflation that is currently breaking will prove to be a very small one, although large enough to slow the rate at which interest rates are cut. But the budget is not the only risk here. The conflict in Ukraine, the conflict in the Middle East, and what Donald Trump does as president could all impact the cost of living here, for better or for worse.
All right, Joel in Crawley there. Thank you very much. Next tonight, Greater Manchester Police say the remains of a baby have been found next to a motorway. The body was found by a member of the public in a field in Salford and remains sealed off. Police are trying to establish the baby's identity. We'll have to bring you more on that story in just a moment. But let's just give you some other news now, and a 92-year-old man has been charged with the murder of a woman whose death has remained a mystery for nearly 60 years. 75-year-old Louisa Dunn was found dead at her home in Bristol in 1967. Her death has become one of Britain's oldest cold cases. Well, today, Ryland Headley from Ipswich appeared in court charged with her murder. Sangeeta Lal reports.
She was a sociable woman, a 75-year-old who was strangled and raped after seeing friends. On the 28th of June 1967, Louisa Dunn's name was on front pages across the country. Her death, the centre of an investigation that spread across the world. 40 years ago, though, the headlines stopped. The trail went cold and Bristol moved on. But police never stopped searching for answers. In 2003, Gary Mason led the cold case team for Avon and Somerset Police.
There was no obvious forensic potential identified at that point.
Last year, though, officers started reviewing her case again and carried out more forensic tests, which led to a breakthrough, with police able to charge a man with her murder.
Just how different would evidence gathering have been in 1967 compared to now?
They certainly wouldn't have been thinking DNA. That wasn't in anyone's mind. So they would have been thinking blood grouping. But of course, the current forensic scientists and police are using that and looking at it in a totally different way, and now thinking DNA.
91 officers were involved with the inquiry into her death. 8,000 people were interviewed to try and find out what happened to Louisa that night.
Well, at the time, neighbours said she was well known to people here and would often attend community events. And on the night she died, she'd had custard and stewed gooseberry with a friend. Later, though, her body was found on her living room floor.
And this is who police believe may be responsible. 92-year-old Ryland Headley, who appeared in court today charged with her rape and murder. He's due to appear at Bristol Crown Court tomorrow, believed to be the oldest cold case murder charge in British history. Almost 60 years on, the investigation into Louisa's death continues. Her family tonight supported by officers, hoping for answers they've waited a lifetime for. Sangi Talal, ITV News, Bristol.
Well, let's return now to reports that Ukraine has fired British-made Storm Shadow missiles at targets inside Russia. We can speak to our political editor now, Robert Peston, who's in West London ahead of his Peston show tonight. Robert, how significant do you think this is?
Oh, I think it is very significant. I remember actually saying on ITV News some months ago that the first we would know that we'd given permission to Kiev, to President Zelensky, to use our Storm Shadow missiles in Russia itself would be when those missiles hit the ground. And so it's proved. We've still not had official confirmation from any government minister, but I have talked to officials privately who confirmed that we have now given that permission to President Zelensky. And it's significant because of how Putin sees it. He has said that any nation, and there are now, we know, at least two, in the case of America and Britain, who help Kiev in this particular way, and that is giving them the technology to strike on Russian soil, would be seen as therefore committing hostile acts themselves. And, you know, the implication is that somehow we're now at war with Russia. Now, plainly, one of the reasons no British minister wants to talk about this is there's no British minister who wants to remotely confirm that we're at war with Russia, which is why everything is so low-key. But it is very significant, particularly against the backdrop where we're getting these increased threats, which I've been talking about in the last couple of days, from sort of increased threats from Putin of using nuclear weapons. So I expect, frankly, to get more information about this in the coming days, and it is a tense time. We should be under no illusion about that.
All right, Robert, for the moment, thank you. Let's go back now to that story. Greater Manchester Police say the remains of a baby have been found next to a motorway in Salford. Our North of England reporter, Amy Welch, is at the scene. Amy, a really distressing story. What more do we know?
Well, we now know that it was actually a woman walking her dog who actually found this baby's remains at around 12:30 this afternoon. Hard to imagine just how distressing that must have been. And Greater Manchester Police held a police conference in the last hour confirming they are following several lines of inquiry. We don't yet know the baby's age, gender or ethnicity, and their attention will now turn to establishing how that baby came to be in these fields near a motorway bridge in Little Hulton in Salford, and just how long they had been here. Well, a post-mortem examination is now taking place, and the police say they need the public's help to find out who this baby's parents are. Earlier, they made this appeal.
We know this news will devastate our communities, and while we do not have all the answers to these questions yet, I want to reassure residents that we will do all we can to find out what has happened here. The most important thing for us right now is to find answers for this baby.
Well, people have just now started laying flowers behind me. Police say they recognise just how sensitive this case is and that they will handle it with the utmost care. They have upped their patrols in the area and say any small amount of information the public can give could be crucial.
All right, Amy, incredibly sensitive, as you say, in Salford. Thank you. There is plenty more to come on the ITV Evening News, including are physician associates replacing qualified doctors? Government vows to find out.
They are just doing their absolute best to provide great quality care for patients. I've seen many of ours in tears and very distressed about what's been going on.
2 Met officers investigated over the crash that killed a pregnant woman and her baby. A look at the future of Ford as the car manufacturer slashes hundreds of UK jobs. That and lots more coming up after the break. Hello and welcome back. The Health Secretary has ordered a review into the use of physician associates amid growing concern about their use in the NHS. Also known as PAs, they are meant to ease the workload on doctors by performing specific tasks in hospitals and surgeries. But with only 2 years of medical training, there are concerns over patient safety, as well as leaving some people unsure whether they're really being seen by a doctor. Here's our health correspondent, Rebecca Barry.
Happy birthday, dear Nana.
She went into hospital after a fall at home. But Susan Pollitt died because of mistakes by a physician associate.
It was the system that had failed us, not him personally.
Her family welcome today's news that the government has ordered a review of their role in the NHS in England.
We're not pleased because of what's happened in the past, but I'm certainly pleased that some action has been taken. If you're in a position in a hospital bed, you don't mind who's helping you as long as they're qualified or at least being supervised for that qualification and know the role that they're doing.
My name's James, one of the physician associates working in the ENT ward.
James is one of more than 40 PAs working here at the Royal Berkshire Hospital.
I'm not a doctor, but I work closely alongside them.
With 2 years of postgraduate medical training, they help diagnose patients but can't prescribe and must be supervised by a doctor. There are more than 3,000 physician associates and anaesthesia associates in the NHS in England, but there are plans to increase that to more than 10,000 in the coming years.
The review will look into the tasks that PAs and AAs are allowed to do and measures to ensure that patients know when they're seeing a medical associate, not a doctor. The Health Secretary says the debate has become toxic, but there are legitimate concerns about transparency, scope of practice and the substituting of doctors.
They provide an essential role for us. They work alongside our doctors, our nurses, our other healthcare professionals. They are just doing their absolute best to provide great quality care for patients. I've seen many of ours in tears and very distressed about what's been going on.
Lay your head. 30-year-old Emily Chesterton died of a blood clot in her lung after she was misdiagnosed by a physician associate she thought was a GP.
She was a gift from God.
Her family campaigning for clearer rules.
It's confusing. We need clarity. Limits must be set as to what they can and cannot do for the safety of everybody. That's patients, doctors, anaesthetists and, of course, PAs.
NHS England insists it's taking action to address the clear and ongoing concerns. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
A criminal investigation has been launched into 2 Met police officers after a pregnant woman and her baby were killed in a crash involving a police car. The 38-year-old's car was struck by the unmarked vehicle in south-east London last month. Our reporter Louisa Britton is outside Scotland Yard for us this evening. Louisa, what more do we know?
Well, this investigation relates to a crash, like you say, that happened last month in which a heavily pregnant woman and her unborn child were killed. The 38-year-old woman, who hasn't been named by police, was driving a car when it was involved in a collision with an unmarked police vehicle. It's understood that it happened on the busy A20 at Eltham on the 17th of October, just after 6:15 in the evening. And it's understood there were 2 unmarked police vehicles that were travelling in the area when the crash happened. One of the vehicles collided with the car the woman was driving. Now, the Independent Office for Police Conduct says that 2 officers from the Metropolitan Police are being investigated for potential driving offences, including causing death by dangerous driving, as well as potential gross misconduct. A 3rd police officer, who was a passenger in the car that crashed, is also being investigated for potential misconduct. Well, investigators will be trying to piece together exactly what happened, reviewing CCTV footage, dashcam footage, as well as witness statements. Only once that investigation has concluded will they be able to determine whether or not to look into criminal proceedings or potential disciplinary proceedings.
All right, Louisa, thank you. Ford has announced it's to cut 800 jobs from the UK as part of a major restructuring programme. The US car maker blamed intense competition from China as well as a slowdown in electric vehicle sales. Well, Stacey Foster is outside their distribution centre in Northamptonshire this evening. Stacey, not good news.
No, and this is 800 jobs in the UK, but it's actually 4,000 roles that will go across the whole of Ford's European division. And the brand says this is about securing the long-term future of Ford. But where will these jobs go? We don't know yet. It has about 8 bases in the UK, so the chances are that some of the roles will go here at the main parts distribution centre, but also in Essex, where Ford has a UK headquarters. But this is a company that's been going through huge change over the past few years. It stopped production of the Ford Fiesta and has moved towards creating luxury, fully electric vehicles. But Ford says that very competitive conditions and lower than expected demand for those electric vehicles is to blame. Ford employs 5,300 people in the UK. Last year, 1,300 roles were cut here as part of changes to the business. So this is not good news once again for the workforce here, but it's also not good news for the UK car industry, and it's certainly not good news for the government, who've been piling on the pressure to make sure that UK car manufacturers are going green, but at what cost?
OK, Stacey, thank you. You're watching the ITV Evening News. It is just before 7 o'clock. Here's what's still ahead. The UK considers Australia's lead in banning under-16s from social media. Farewell to one of the greats. Rafa Nadal bows out of his legendary tennis career.
The way that I would like to be remembered more is like a good person from a small village in Mallorca that follow their dreams.
Manifesting success, how Dua Lipa and other celebs contributed to the word of the year. We bear witness to Bocky's remarkable recovery after brain surgery.
And with Arctic air continuing to flood in across the UK, we continue to shiver. But how long will it last? I'll give you all details a little later in the programme.
But first, when Ron Guy died in 2006, he was severely malnourished and dehydrated. A hero of the Second World War, Ron had served in an intelligence unit run by James Bond author Ian Fleming. But his time in the military took a toll on his mental health, and towards the end of his life, Ron was sectioned repeatedly by an NHS trust, now under investigation for alleged failings. The Lampard inquiry is looking into the deaths of in excess of 2,000 inpatients who died while under the care of NHS mental health units in Essex between 2000 and 2023. Since the inquiry began, it has heard shocking allegations of sexual abuse on wards, as well as patients at serious risk of suicide being able to take their own lives on units. Our reporter Charlie Frost spoke to Ron's daughter.
This is a portrait of my father that my mum did, him in his commando uniform with his green beret.
Margot Binns couldn't be prouder of her father Ron, an athletic and sometimes rebellious kid. When he was just 15, he first tried to sign up. His dad quickly put a stop to it, but Ron couldn't be held back for long.
2 years later, as soon as my dad was 17, as soon as he was old enough, on his 17th birthday in fact, he went and joined the Royal Marines. And he was chosen to be in an intelligence unit that was, I suppose, the brainchild of Churchill and Ian Fleming, who wrote the Bond novels, became their sort of bureaucratic commander.
Ron had been recruited into Fleming's secret 30th Assault Unit, and come D-Day, his job was to penetrate German defences.
Their remit was to go behind enemy lines, be like ghosts on the battlefield, if you like, unseen, unheard, and gather intelligence.
These daring operations took him to Brittany, where he met his wife. Theirs became an unlikely but enduring love story.
She was in the French resistance along with her her mother and her sister, they were harbouring airmen who were shot down over France and getting them through the safe lines back to England. And that's where they met. They knew each other for 2 weeks.
But then they wrote to each other for years.
My mum kept them in this very box, in the top of her wardrobe, all her life.
Ron proposing and them planning their lives in pen and pencil.
Yeah, look, this one says your loving husband.
Yeah, in inverted commas, because obviously they weren't married.
But he's obviously asked her by this point.
Yes.
Yeah.
In 1947, they were reunited and finally married, setting up home in Essex and going on to have 6 children, though Ron's experiences in the forces never left him, and Margot says he suffered bouts of depression for the majority of his life.
He would not get out of bed for about a week or 2, and then he'd gradually emerge, and things would go back to normal. And this was my dad's pattern, I would say, for, well, ever since I knew him, until 1994, I think it was.
That's when Ron sought the help of a GP, who Margot says prescribed him antidepressants with no counselling or proper examination.
And what we noticed is he very quickly then went into this enormous high. So he went from being depressed to incredibly, it was something we'd never seen. So in 50 years, he then attempted suicide, which he had never done before. And this is when he first ended up in the care of the Essex mental health services.
Ron was sectioned and then released into the community without support, something that would happen repeatedly for the next 12 years.
They would put him on different antidepressants, they would put him on lithium. Nothing seemed to stop this cycle. And we would often contact them. They seemed to be completely uninterested until he reached rock bottom and he was suicidal. Then they would section him.
The cycle finally ended in 2006, when aged 80, Ron was sectioned one last time. His physical condition deteriorated so badly he had to be transferred to a general hospital.
They were aghast at the state he was in. He had bed sores, he was very badly dehydrated, he got sepsis, and he had basically starved and dehydrated himself to death.
Your father, a war hero, starved to death in an NHS hospital. How does that make you feel?
I feel as though my dad gave completely and utterly selflessly. He gave because he wanted to give to his country. He was never thinking of a reward at the end of it. And the one time he asked for help from the state, I think he was failed terribly.
Gosh, Charlie, incredibly moving story there from Margot, and of course what happened to Ron. What have those responsible for mental health services in Essex had to say in response?
Well, as you say, simply heartbreaking how Ron's life ended. And Margot told me she's in no doubt that her father wouldn't have died in the way that he did if he'd have received the mental health care that he deserved. She believes the people treating him never even tried to get to the bottom of why he had mental health problems. Well, in a statement, the chief executive of Essex Partnership University NHS Foundation Trust, the trust responsible for the majority of mental health provision in the county, apologised. The chief executive saying he's sorry the care Ron received was not the standard it should have been, offering his deepest condolences to Margot and her family, adding that since Ron's death, a huge amount of work has taken place to transform mental health services, including the introduction of a specialist service to support veterans and their families. Now, Margot gave her evidence to the Lampard inquiry when it first began in September, but on Monday and 3 days after that, more families of those 2,000 vulnerable people that died in Essex mental health facilities will share their experiences with the chair, Baroness Lampard, and that will conclude this part of the inquiry before it gets underway again next year, when experts and the Trust will face questioning.
It certainly will. Charlie, thank you. Next, the government says it is considering banning social media for children under 16. Technology Secretary Peter Kyle said the move was on the table if social media companies don't do more to protect children from harmful content. He also said there would be more research into the use of smartphones by children. This report from Sam Holder.
Molly Russell took her own life at just 14. She was repeatedly exposed to posts encouraging self-harm and suicide. Mia Jinim was also 14. She took her life after being bullied over social media. Murray Dowie was 16. He'd been tricked into sending sexual photos and then blackmailed. Their parents have all demanded more be done to protect young people on social media.
We've had about 2 decades of social media, and in that time there's been an age of self-regulation, and it's quite apparent that that hasn't worked, because dangerous content like Molly was seeing 7 years ago is still there.
Australia recently announced plans for a world-first ban for under-16s.
Social media is doing harm to our kids, and I'm calling time on it.
And the UK is considering doing the same if recent regulations aren't enough.
I'm in close touch with the Australian legislators that are leading this legislation. I want to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, what evidence they're basing it on, but also the impact that it has. I don't want to ban things outright unless I absolutely need to do.
Under last year's UK Online Safety Act, social media platforms are required to protect children from harmful content. Some pages and sites will have age checks, and new criminal offences have been introduced, including for cyberflashing. Under Australia's proposed under-16s ban, firms will have to make changes within a year or face fines of up to £25 million. These students in Cumbria have grown up with social media.
I got most social medias in year 7, and I'd say it really, it just makes you vulnerable to seeing so much stuff that you really shouldn't see at that age.
I would compare myself a lot to these influencers who got popular due to their looks or like the overconsumption, because they'd buy so many things to be pretty, and I felt like I had to be like that, and when I wasn't or when I couldn't be, it really took an impact on my mental health and self-esteem.
Social media has long been a wild west for children. Unless there's real change, it may be banned for them altogether. Sam Holder, ITV News.
Tennis has said goodbye to one of its finest ever players after Rafael Nadal finally called time on his legendary career. The 22-time Grand Slam champion retired from the sport last night after his Spain team was knocked out of the Davis Cup. In an emotional ceremony full of tears, Nadal told the crowd he was just a kid that followed their dreams. Our sports editor Steve Scott looks back on one of tennis's all-time greats.
Rafa Nadal!
Being soundly beaten in his last ever game instinctively did not feel like the finale Rafa Nadal deserved. But the outpouring that followed more than made up for that. The affection shown to this modern tennis great on his swan song, moving for him and his family watching on.
The way that I would like to be remembered more is like a good person from a small village in Mallorca that follow their dreams, worked as hard as possible to be where I am today.
It wasn't just the 11,000 courtside who wanted to express what Nadal meant to them.
Please welcome Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal.
Nadal and Federer shared tears when the Swiss icon called it a day. From retirement, he posted, "You beat me a lot. You challenged me in ways no one else could. You made me enjoy the game even more." There were tributes too from other adversaries and friends.
The passion and intensity that you played with was something that I think all tennis players aspire to, and what all tennis fans will remember you for.
Your tenacity, your fighting spirit, the energy that you brought, the power, is something that will be studied and is something that will be transferred to many, many generations that are coming up.
So Rafa, the best thing about retirement is that we can now go and watch our beloved Real Madrid together. A la Madrid.
Wearing his trademark bandana, a teenage Nadal muscled his way to his first Grand Slam in Paris. It was the start of something very special. His 22nd and last major title, that also included 2 Olympic golds, would come at the same venue, Roland Garros, 17 years later.
The legend continues to grow.
Such has been his dominance in Paris, 14 French Open successes. The city showed its appreciation last night in a way that only it can. That recognition and respect also reflected in an invite to carry the torch at the Olympics this summer. First Federer, then Murray, and now Nadal. Only Djokovic is still standing, as tennis welcomes a new generation who have an almost impossible job to live up to. Steve Scott, ITV News.
We're talking of incredibly successful people. Do you believe in the power of mind over matter? Well, if you do, you might have manifested some good outcomes for yourself using good old-fashioned positive thinking. And after a number of celebrities like Dua Lipa spoke about manifesting their own successes, use of the word has taken off. So much so that manifest has been named as Cambridge Dictionary's Word of the Year. Olivia Guthrie reports.
Some of you maybe don't believe in manifestation, but...
When Dua Lipa headlined at Glastonbury, you might think it was down to talent and good fortune in her career. But according to the singer, it's actually because she manifested it.
One thing that's undeniable is magic.
Dua isn't the only celebrity jumping on this spiritual trend.
I am a powerful manifester.
I believe that anybody can channel that feeling and manifest for themselves.
I knew when I was going onto the pitch that I was going to score, I manifested it.
Manifest is the word of 2024, as revealed by Cambridge Dictionary. Searched for more than 130,000 times on their website this year. The meaning of manifest has changed over time, once used by the likes of Chaucer and Shakespeare here at the Globe to mean clearly or obviously. In later centuries, it came to mean a list of goods on a ship. By the 21st century, it referred to the appearance of ghosts. And in the modern sense of the word, it essentially means fake it till you make it.
Using mindset and having that motivation to sort of get somewhere and creating that for yourself.
So in your internal reality, hopefully it will manifest into the external and become real.
I am not visualising, I'm just getting on with life.
I wish I could tell you that thinking about things will magically make them happen, but tragically, I think there is no evidence that that's actually what happens, no scientific evidence.
So despite the word's popularity, science says manifesting is nonsense. Last year's Cambridge Dictionary Word of the Year was hallucinate. Maybe we're all trying to avoid reality rather than living in the present. Olivia Guthrie, ITV News.
Still to come on the programme. Bocky, the brown bear, back on his feet after having life-saving surgery. We check in with the cub and his keepers. And of course, Becky will be here with the weather. Join us after the break. Hello and welcome back. Becky is here with the weather. Becky, the first cold snap of the year, it feels like. How long is it going to last?
Well, a little bit longer. I love the fact everyone's talking about the weather. It makes me feel so important. So definitely some picture postcard scenes from around the North York Moors National Park today. Several centimetres of lying snow here. As you can see, that snow has fallen fairly widely across the UK. Mostly settling across the higher ground. We had 14 centimetres recorded in the Scottish Highlands. Absolutely gorgeous. Very lucky indeed. Snow showers to lower levels too, but not necessarily settling. And I'll tell you why that is in just a moment. But for now, this is the weather warning picture this evening. Snow and ice hazard still across many areas. Unsurprising, really, with temperatures away from the towns and cities dropping sharply under those clear skies. But why, when it's cold for everyone, hasn't that snow settled more widely? And why have some seen rain instead of snow? Well, here's the science bit. There is an incredibly fine line between rain, sleet and snow. Now, when precipitation leaves the clouds, it starts off as snow. Did you know that? Temperatures can be as low as -16 degrees, that high up in the air. Now, the air warms as it goes closer to the earth, and that snow will gradually melt and it will turn to rain. Not very exciting. Now, during a cold spell, the air is cold enough for the snow to fall all the way down to the ground. That's the exciting bit. That's what all the children want. That snow might not settle, though. The ground might still just be too warm. So the snowflakes melt on contact and we get disappointing puddles instead of the gorgeous drifting snowflakes of our dreams. But if the ground is cold enough, often the higher ground first of all, then the snow is able to settle, which is far more fun than puddles. Now, we stick with the cold and wintry picture for another couple of days. Let's have a look now at the main national forecast.
Today, expect to see some heavy downpours all over the country. Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Oh, I absolutely love this weather. It's so exciting to talk even about the potential of snow at this time of year, although it is too early, of course, to talk about whether or not it's going to be a white Christmas. We can certainly, though, talk about the next couple of days feeling cold with sunny spells and wintry showers, wet and windy, but turning milder, I'm afraid, into the weekend. Let's have a look at the here and now, though. We've still got weather warnings in force across the UK, those wintry hazards continuing. As you can see, we've got the sort of lump of precipitation down across the southwestern parts and a warning for snow and ice there across the far southwest by the end of the night, as it just sort of gives a glancing blow for you. But it's a cold picture tonight and a cold start tomorrow with a widespread frost. We've still got that snow warning down across the far southwest for much of the day, but really it's a beautiful day tomorrow. Sunshine and wintry showers. Most of those showers are going to be across the northern northwestern parts, and yes, most of them will be rather wintry in places. Just look at those temperatures and then add on the effect of that very cold northerly wind, and it's going to feel colder still. In fact, it'll feel below freezing. So try and wrestle your small people into something warm, but only for another couple of days, because as I say, it's milder but stormy towards the weekend.
Heinz Beans sponsors ITV National Weather.
Thank you, Becky. Now, you might remember Bocky, the brown bear, who underwent pioneering brain surgery last month. After suffering from regular seizures, Bocky needed a life-saving operation to drain fluid away from his brain. 6 weeks on, and you'll be pleased to hear that apart from a slightly awkward hairdo, Bocky is making excellent progress. From Kent, Carrie Davis reports.
Filming with animals doesn't always go to plan, but Bocky is a very willing participant. Rejected by his mother, he was hand-reared and grew to love human interaction. His personable demeanour has helped save his life. After suffering seizures, in September he became the first brown bear to have brain surgery to drain fluid from his skull.
It's only through his personality and character that we've been able to even contemplate putting him through the procedure, knowing that we could keep such a close eye on him, monitor him, medicate him, and do everything that we would need to do post-operatively. The important thing is that he has a good quality of life, and for his time here, that he remains a happy, goofy bear as he is now and always has been.
Apart from that pretty severe haircut, you wouldn't know that he'd had major surgery just 6 weeks ago. He might not know it, but he's a pretty remarkable bear.
And the keepers say he's almost made a full recovery. He's put on 20 kilos since his operation, and at just under 3 years old has plenty more growing to do. John Ford has worked with the bears here at Wildwood for almost a decade.
To be able to see him just doing everything he normally does, he's got a lot of speed, a lot of pace, and a lot of strength. Anything he can wreck, he likes to break stuff for us. So yeah, just from our point of view, it's just lovely to see him sort of return back to form.
And he's showing signs that he's ready for a sort of hibernation. That's a really good sign as well.
Yeah, so it's semi-hibernation that brown bears go through is called torpor. And some of the main signs for him, he's digging up grass and turf from his outside enclosure. He's dragging it into his bed and he's sort of making it his own. He's adding his own materials.
Nesting for a bit of winter hibernation. Bocky's got the right idea. Carrie Davis, ITV News in Herne.
Now, just before we go, we bring you some sad news of the death of one of our colleagues here in the ITV family, the long-serving political editor of UTV, Ken Reid.
the deal has been done. The 8 parties at Stormont, the 2 governments and George Mitchell are all on board. There were obviously fears within your party that were evident today. We were talking to some people. Do you think that you can quell those fears?
In a career spanning almost 3 decades at UTV, he covered some of the most historic times in Northern Ireland, such as the Troubles and the Good Friday Agreement, as well as interviewing 7 prime ministers and 2 US presidents. He was a trusted voice to millions of viewers and a true gentleman to work with. He was 69 when he died. And that tribute to Ken is where we end our programme tonight. Tom is back at 10, but from all of us on the Evening News team, bye-bye.